Good afternoon. I'm Marnie Clippinger, Chief Operating Officer at the Marketing Science Institute. As many of you know, since 1961, MSI has been the bridge between marketing theory and business practice. We fund research by leading academics worldwide on topics identified by our 70-plus corporate sponsors and disseminate results through members-only events like this and a variety of publications. I'm very pleased to welcome you to another MSI For Members by Members webinar. This is a series of webinars on subjects related to MSI's current research priority topics. I'd like to point out the Chat with Presenter function in the left-hand corner of your screen. Please use this feature to send through any questions you have during the presentation you're about to hear. We will gather the questions and have a brief Q&A session following the talk. Also, our presenters' slides, as well as the entire webinar, will be available for download on the MSI member website. And now it's my real pleasure to introduce you to today's featured speaker, Bill Pink, who has kindly agreed to present today's webinar on using connected data intelligence to measure brand performance. Bill Pink is managing partner of Millward Brown Analytics in North America, a new Millward Brown business unit. Bill also serves as chairman of Millward Brown's Global Marketing Science Council. In these roles, he works both externally with global brands and internally with Millward Brown's analytics and solutions teams to develop approaches that effectively address key marketing questions around communications impact, brand strategy and positioning, and marketing effectiveness. Bill has written and published extensively on the topics that he will be discussing today. Most recently, he has an article in AdMap, and he's a frequent speaker at major marketing industry events. Like many of you, Bill describes himself as a wayward social scientist with a PhD and a master's degree in politics from New York University, where he specialized in methodology. It's a real pleasure to have you with us today, Bill. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Marnie, and hello, everyone. I'm delighted to be with you and to share this content with you today. As Marnie said, we'll be going through using connected data intelligence to measure brand performance. And as I'm sure everyone is readily aware in this audience, in today's world, nearly everything is passively observed and managed in a digitized fashion. The range of content now available to marketers and researchers is both inspiring and it's intimidating. Consumer sentiment captured via websites, via social media outlets, exposure to advertising that is recorded by set-top boxes, digital tags, captured on mobile devices. The list goes on, and it's a wide range of data choices. This wide range, however, poses an incredible amount of risk and uncertainty as it sits next to traditional research methods and approaches. And all the marketing and business decision makers are facing important questions about how to leverage this new information for better decision making. With that in mind, at Millward Brown, our belief is that the winning firms will be those that manage this uncertainty well, the firms that connect different data assets in a strategic manner, that understand the analytic tools needed to deploy against these objectives, that nurture talent to handle this kind of ambiguity that is inherent in using multiple data assets, and by repeated testing of relationships to understand which new data assets, such as search and social, are predictive of traditional survey-based equity measures or other sales metrics as well. In effect, we're trying to build up a set of generalized patterns to help guide our marketing and research decisions. This is what is going to be the context for my talk today over the next 35 minutes or so with you. I will share how we are embedding connected data intelligence into our measurement of brand performance. We'll draw upon hundreds of tests we have conducted, as well as specific case studies that evaluate how digitally measured assets such as search and social impact or do not impact survey-based brand equity measures and offline sales. All told, I hope you come away from the talk with an understanding about how Millward Brown remains true to its mission, to provide the insights and recommendations to grow great brands, but now by collecting relevant data assets in the new data ecosystem. So let's talk a bit about what we're actually going to discuss today. First and foremost, I'll spend some time answering the question, why now? It's not like data integration, the terms, the idea is such a new thing. But what makes this particular moment in time such a burning platform for using connected data intelligence to measure brand performance? We'll get into that topic head on. And second, I'll share some tangible recommendations about what we believe we need to do differently. Differently both as Millward Brown, but more widely as an industry, and how that by doing these things we'll be in a better position to leverage connected data intelligence to maximum effect. You'll hear about 3 very specific recommendations, and you'll see how those tie into the examples that follow. And it's those specific examples that will really get into the heart of the matter. We'll share some findings of our global research on aggregate level patterns of relationships between search, social, and brand data. We'll show the necessity of embedding a system of analytics to build on this learning and overcome any of the inherent obstacles that exist in all organizations that don't embed a system of analytics. And last, we will share some consumer level examples that are at a much more granular level and how we are stitching together data assets to get kind of the ultimate read on how the elements of the marketing ecosystem fit together in understanding consumer journeys. That's a lot to cover. Hopefully we'll get through it all within a short amount of time, and we'll still have time for questions. Okay, let's start with a visual image. There we go. This is one of the what I would call hot consulting images, because a few folks have used it, but I think it's because it's so impactful. This image is an amazing historical coincidence. It happens to be a photo taken from similar vantage points of the elections of the new popes, just 8 years apart from the prior election. And if you look at it, you see the religious pilgrims gathering to celebrate together what was effectively the same event, but the underpinning technology, the underpinning setting is quite different. Nearly all the attendees in the more recent photo have their mobile devices held aloft, providing what almost looks like a sea of lights. They are capturing this intimate moment via photos, via videos, and are able to immediately share it with friends and family. As the Samsung Android label actually says, mobile devices have become life's companion. And this picture, or these 2 pictures, really demonstrate that. And while this is really about the changing human experience overall, if we think about the marketing and research implications, they become quite clear. First, consumer intimacy is a given. We know where the folks in the photo are. We know what event they are participating in. We know the minute-by-minute evolution of their interactions. We know what they are sharing for the moment, and we know the responses to what they are sharing. If we put ourselves in from a brand perspective, think of all the relevance, the moment, the receptivity to the message that's captured here that a consumer would expect you to bring into any interaction. And obviously, the data and consumer insights are abundant in these photos. Each one of these individuals in the sea of mobile lights is being passively observed and digitally collected by their own devices they are raising up into the sky. So much is potentially known about them without even needing a researcher to interact with them in a formal manner. But the real question becomes how to leverage this massive information to help drive brand growth. Another way to think of that image, which is just one image among many, is how does this all lead to the sources of disruption for marketing and for research overall? There is a ton written on this topic already. And this is how we have sort of summarized all the writing, all the thinking in terms of sort of 4 big buckets of disruption. First, there's data at scale. This represents the unprecedented volume and variety of data in the current landscape. This can include digitally measured behaviors, comments, sentiments. It's all readily available. It all fits into the headline of quote-unquote big data. But of course, that's just one attribute. It also tends to be unstructured. It tends to be noisy. It tends to require a lot of cleaning to be useful. Simultaneously, there's been this incredible democratization of data collection, or another way of saying the new reality that anyone can be a researcher. Data is readily available for all that want it. Many times it's even free. And from a pure survey perspective, do-it-yourself research is conducted even more often than professional research. And while this may have been a threat at one point to the research industry, it has pushed traditional researchers to be smarter. Long, bloated surveys are out. Conversations are expected rather than research language. Interactive surveys, immersive content, device agnostic. We all know the terms, and all of these developments have really come about because of the democratization of data collection. Last, on the corner, we've got data in motion. I think this is my favorite property of the new data assets because they're characterized by being fast to access, and they observe phenomena across time and space. This is repeated viewing of the same behaviors, whether that be on media platforms, on conversations and sentiments. Everything is in motion, and they mainly function because of the mobile world. Measurement continues with the change of moments and settings, all without the consumer needing to engage with a researcher or if it is in a research setting, it's in a manner that is convenient or even desirable to him or her. But putting it all together, that leads to the uncertainty we talked about before. What's believable? How does it all fit together? How can it be leveraged? This has sort of led to two camps. Many consultants pointing to these new data assets as new oil, leading to better decision making. Other consultants pointing to noise in the data, that it could be a data quagmire. It's too dirty to be useful. Our take is, as usual, the truth lies in the middle. The winning firms are those that kind of embrace the uncertainty and manage the uncertainty. Leverage prior experience, leverage prior knowledge, think about how to bring together the assets through different analytic tools, know what's worked in the past, and nurture the talent that can handle the kind of ambiguity, ultimately will result in competitive advantage. And as we think about what we are hearing in terms of a marketing wish list from various leading experts in the field, whether that be on the client side or the agency side, there are some key themes that tie right back to what we've seen from the sources of disruption. Probably the loudest one is that the industry is screaming out for research solutions and approaches that have a future orientation. Again, not a new request. For every hockey fan in the audience, how many times have we quoted Wayne Gretzky about skating to where the puck will be instead of where it already is? But the urgency of foresight has never been greater, at a time when marketing has never been held up to quite the level of accountability it is today for growing sales and growing demand tomorrow. This, of course, ties right into the need to scale analytic systems that enable us to form forward-looking simulations and scenario plans, and pushes us further to test and discover which data assets are best fit for this purpose. Once we think of those dimensions, the questions become quite clear. What is the role of social and search? What is the role of more active data collection, typically surveys? What is the role of a point-in-time study versus an ongoing tracking study over time? How does this help us or not understand the interplay of emotional connection and in-market outcomes and behaviors? And what are the state-of-the-art techniques we should be bringing to bear? From our perspective, this all has led to a very clear mission statement. We believe that we need to use connected data intelligence to unlock deeper insights that fuel growth. This is behind all of our research and development efforts, all of our thinking going forward. And of course, it's very easy to say that connected data is important. Probably hearing that from almost everybody. But it's quite different to have done the research and testing in advance to see which data assets generally relate to different components of brand performance, to have a recommended set of analytic protocols in advance that help us connect data at different levels of aggregation, whether that be over time or at the consumer level. So what do we need to do differently? This is a promise I made up front. What are the actions we need to take? Let's go step by step through what we believe are the big three. First, mine existing data assets. Go deeper to uncover hidden insights. As my friend and colleague Nick Nyan at WPP Digital likes to say, we must embrace the fact that we have moved from the business of data creation to data curation. Not every question requires a new survey. We need to think about leveraging the data we already have, or we can easily obtain via passive measurement, than endlessly commissioning new studies. The new studies are still important, as you'll see in point 2, and we need to think about how best to leverage them. But this notion of new study first, data creation needs to change. We are now in an environment of data curation. Point 2, connect the assets. Connect the assets to create a measurement ecosystem. How to better utilize observations and short surveys together to answer how, what, and why. You'll see some examples of this coming up. And the most successful research programs and decision-making support tools we have built are the ones that embrace this notion of building a measurement ecosystem that is usually a combination of both behavioral and attitudinal insights. Point 3, embrace granularity. much of our data, whether it be on sales or brand, is moving from only being viewed in aggregate and moving down to the segment, to the region, to the store, to the household, to the person, even to the moment for the same individual that vary throughout the day. We know that this is where the interesting variation occurs, where the insights tend to be found at the deepest levels. But that does not negate the benefits of analyzing aggregated data viewed over very long time frames, which is often the only way we have it. And in many settings, that's still just our starting point. So in the slides that follow, we will showcase some of our global research, which is run across brands, categories, and markets at an aggregate level to shed a light on generalizable patterns. After we look at those aggregate relationships, the analytics behind them, and what we have found, we will get a bit more comprehensive as we customize for particular cases. And we'll start to go wider and wider in terms of the amount of data we're covering, and then we'll end up more granular and more granular till we're at the ultimate level of granularity in terms of what we can pull together with the data for an individual. So let's get started. There we go. Okay, let's talk about the global research and development work, finding the digital signals that matter most. As we mentioned earlier, we've been working on a global research and development program to test which passively observed and digitally measured data assets are the most informative for measuring ongoing brand health and campaign performance. Our main question is to understand if there are generalizable patterns that we can leverage to make recommendations around which data assets generally relate or represent which dimensions of brand success. And you can see different ways of formulating that question on the slide. That was the objective, and as you could see here, it was quite expansive. We've covered 8 categories and 5 markets, about 2 years on average for each test in terms of the scope of the data. And in terms of the actual data sources themselves, what we've tested, we looked at about 48 different survey-based measures of equity. We had sales and marketing investments in almost all the cases. We tested 113 different what we'll call potential digital signals. And that included a wide range of data sets, web traffic, search volume, social listening, both in social listening within one social media platform and across social media platforms. So it's a pretty massive scope of tests here. And then from the analytics side, as opposed to the data, it was also quite expansive. Overall, we ended up running about 458 different time series models and tests to evaluate the strength of the relationships among different combinations of data sources and metrics. And of course, we did a lot of homework. Very simple data exploration, scatter plots, curve fitting, what I like to refer to as, or a friend has taught me, the always popular eyeball-o-metrics, where you're literally looking at the trends next to each other. All the descriptive homework that you do in conjunction with the formal modeling. And on the formal modeling side, we've been using dynamic regressions to isolate short-term and long-term components in all these digital trends. So let's talk about the formal modeling for a moment. The key here is decomposing our digital signals into these long-term trends and short-term reactions. Now, we have found for quite some time that the characteristics of dynamic regressions serve us quite well. Serve us well to pull apart these short-term and long-term trends. We've used it on sales data for years. We've used it on brand data for years. And we're finding these same models working well to help us understand the trends on the digital behaviors. So let's talk about how these models tend to work and why we like them so much. Well, if the data available for modeling is weekly, if we're at that level of aggregation, then a dynamic model will re-estimate the contribution of each explanatory variable on our outcome variable for every week in the data set. That is a key benefit, as opposed to a static model where we generally have one estimate for each explanatory variable. Of course, there are many, many forms of dynamic models and static models, but that's a stereotype, but let's just work with that as a high-level position. For us, that time-varying approach more closely reflects how advertising works, because it allows us to see how the estimate of the contributions or the explanatory variables evolve over time. So when a dynamic model estimates the contribution of recent advertising to short-term changes in search, the recent advertising past has a bigger influence than the more distant past. So last week's advertising will have a bigger effect than advertising from 2 months ago in these types of models. And just as importantly, we get an evolving base level of our measures. You can think of this as a constant term that gets re-estimated each week. And for established brands, this generally moves upwards or downwards very slowly, drifting along and generally matching a long-term trend in brand health that we see in survey data. So now that we've seen all this, let's start with some, on the methodology at least, let's start with some simple descriptive findings. So first and foremost, in terms of what we're calling digital explorations, the potential signals are influenced by many factors, factors that we've seen influence brand data, sales data over time, and will be familiar to all of us. First and foremost, for many categories, there are very clear seasonal patterns. This could easily have looked like a pattern we've all looked at before on sales data. It just happens to be search data and web behavioral data. And you could easily see the seasonal spikes in the holidays that come out, probably from gift giving in this case. On the other side part of the slide, you can see where social conversation is so impacted by external events. The conversation for this brand sort of drifts along, and all of a sudden, new news, it was sold to a new company, a massive spike for a short amount of time. Drifts along a little more noisily, and then someone renames it after a family member, and the social media kind of goes wild again. These are the kinds of things we need to control for if we're going to use these data sets to understand them as potential indicators for long-term trends. And it's the kind of factors we're all used to controlling for in work we've done for quite some time. And that was a nice, simple example. Not always simple and aligned, however. This happens to be a new launch. And what we often see in new launches is that the initial time frames tend to be messy. In this case, search started fast and then tapered off quickly, even as sales continued to grow. It took some time for the brand to almost find an equilibrium in which the sales and the search data started to drift together. It took a while for that to occur. So as we're thinking about these data sets as potential signals for brand health, we know we need to still let some time occur. A launch will give us all sorts of information about what's going on in the moment. But if we want to use it as a longer-term predictive device, we still need some trend in the data to pull that apart. Now here's an example of where we start to look at some of the formal modeling output. In this case, we're just pulling apart the base levels of the digital signals, the base level of search, the base level of social, and trending that over time alongside our own brand equity from a survey. What's amazing here is you can see how quickly just the general trend on trend before we do anything else to test it falls neatly together after we've controlled for the short-term influences. We have seen this for quite some time. Brand equity tends to move along slowly and tends to move along with base sales levels. So it's not too surprising to us that we see a similar pattern emerge when we look at base social and base search volume. The key, however, is the way we've pulled this out. The dynamic modeling is what allows us to understand the long-term trend this way and gives us sort of the confidence that it's behaving in ways similar to what we've seen in offline data for years. Okay, that's more background. Now let's talk about some specific patterns we found. The next 4 slides are summaries of what we're starting to look at as generalized patterns across search and social analyses. As always, even with 458 models, we still have lots of work to do, which sounds like a silly sentence, but it's true. So even though this is where we are now, this is an ongoing set of analyses. First and foremost, we consistently see a strong relationship between search volumes and survey-based salience measures. The scatter plot in the automotive category here is a good example of this. You can sort of visually see the curve that would fit these points quite well. So first and foremost, we think of search as a proxy measure for how top of mind the brand can be when consumers are actively looking for a product or service. Again, on the bottom side, after we run our dynamic models, the resulting base search trends tend to align with sales performance. And this is visible after accounting for short-term influences. This is a healthcare brand, happens to be from Brazil. We could still see a relatively noisy long-term trend in search, but the bumps and bruises generally of the trend follow along the sales trend. And we're seeing more and more search levels reflecting changes in interest and salience over time and tying to sales performance. But of course, it's never quite so simple. The relationship does vary by situation. Let's look at these. Here are 3 different brands. We start with a retail brand in the UK with a very strong e-commerce strategy and e-commerce channel. There, this is data we haven't done anything to. We just plotted the raw search volumes, the weekly sales. Not surprising given the nature of their business. The raw signals actually do better than anything else. We were absolutely fine at that stage, which is different from pulling apart any of the underneath dynamics. For other brands like the shampoo brand and the car brand on the other parts of the slide, not quite the same. We had to pull out the short-term influences. We had to understand seasonal factors for the shampoo category. We had to understand media influences and all the things you would typically model to get to our base trend that aligned with sales. So it's not always a one-size-fits-all in terms of how search and sales go together and how search can be best used as a signal of brand success. We still need to do our homework. We need to think about the situation that the brand finds itself in, and then we can move forward. Now let's talk a bit about social. When we compare trends in volume of social buzz to our survey measures, we see a very mixed bag of results depending on what the conversations that are occurring on social are actually about. We see lots of examples in which the volume and social sentiments align with our survey-based measures that tend to be along the lines of new innovations or new news about a brand. But even here on this one simple scatter plot, you could see immediately it's not quite as clean as the scatter plot from the search slide 2 slides ago. And this last piece of not quite as clean that is an important message here. Social relationships between brand and response are complicated. They need to be modeled with other outcomes to understand the role of social in the ecosystem. You'll see examples of that in a few slides. But before we go there, we wanted to talk about the relationships between search volumes and social conversation with advertising investments and creative quality. So let's switch gears a bit. In this slide, you can see how both search and social do respond strongly to advertising. In general and on average, volumes of both search and social react to the influence of increasing media. If media spend decreases, on average, both signals tend to decrease. When it increases, you do see an increase in response. And this, for our search, tends to be tied more towards new news. With social, we've seen it tied to more multidimensional forms of creative qualities. It goes well beyond news. It goes into all sorts of breakthrough and enjoyability, and you can get a little deeper on it because you can see what people are saying. In fact, when we look at the level of brand conversation and kind of equalize the GRP effect, or if you're talking about TV, when we bucket our results into campaigns that we've classified with low, medium, or high creative quality on our own data, it's very clear the role of creative in having an amplifying effect on the response in social. So if generating social buzz is the desired outcome, we do know it will be a combination of media investment and creative quality that will lead to the best type of outcome. Again, mirroring what we've seen in the past on traditional survey measures and sales data. So let's get a little deeper. Those are just high-level general patterns. And we know how they apply to an individual brand in an individual situation will probably vary. And there are many factors behind this variation. So in this example, let's focus on the content of the social itself. We've got 3 brands with varying size or amounts of social buzz, from large, medium, and small. What was really interesting was one of the brands over-indexed a lot in terms of the qualitative nature of the social commentary. It had more to do with communications and what was being communicated, the advertising itself, than the brand. The other 2 brands over-indexed on comments about the brand experience. That was the deep dive within the social data. When we then looked to tie it to traditional equity measures and survey data, what was very interesting was those brands that had social comments that were more about the brand experience had a larger effect on equity as we measured it offline. For the brand where the conversation was more about the creative itself, that was good news for the creative breakthrough. It just didn't translate into brand effects. And these are the types of things we want to continue to study, both in aggregate and on an individual brand basis. Now let's go further. Now we're going to try to weave connected dots even beyond the digital behavioral assets and equity, which we just started to look at, and incorporate sales, media, and you can start to see the entire network of relationships that drives brand success. In this example, we're just looking at a subset of many different data assets that were tied together. And one of the key questions was, and often is social media a leading indicator of sales and equity? That is an extremely common question. And I always give the same answer, yes and no. And I usually get a frustrated response. What does that mean? Sounds like a politician. But this visual gives a very good sense of it. We see here sales in and of themselves tend to lead to more earned media. Folks do talk about the experience with the brand, but they have to try it and buy it often first before they talk about it. They could talk about it before they've ever used it, but often that is highly informed by prior experience. Those experiences often are presented on social quite quickly. If it's a beverage, I could still be at a club or restaurant or at a party and talking about my brand experience. That then tends to be picked up in our survey data, which isn't quite as fast. And we are picking up those longer term effects. And like we saw, sometimes it relates and sometimes it doesn't. In this example, it impacted 2 out of 3 of the different perceptions we were measuring. All of those things then led to more sales effects over time, which of course led to more social. So ultimately, when folks are talking about leading and lagging indicators in this setting, a great way to think about it is don't talk about leading and lagging indicators. Think more about the system. Think about the association. Think about the network and how it all relates to each other so that you get a sense of things are not quite so linear as A leads to B all the time. It's usually B already led to A before A led to B and back again. So that was some examples in aggregate of our R&D and how search and social are leading to equity and sales. All of this ultimately forms a holistic vision of a more complete connected brand measurement system. We couldn't create a brand measurement system without multiple data assets covering multiple types of questions, and we need to be as comprehensive as we can so that we don't leave out part of the puzzle. But to see the benefits of this kind of point of view, where you're looking across questions, where you're looking across a whole system, ultimately trying to see how they work together and impact performance, we need to start to embed analytics in a much more automated fashion. It's not only analytics that help us to tell the story and pull the dots together, just as in the examples you've seen, but it quickly becomes analytics driving our ability to make actionable decisions on time as well. Let's look at a real example again. Here is data that we pulled that's just for showing a widening gap for a particular brand between worth what you pay and average price. One from a survey, trended over time, one from behavioral data. What you could see quite easily was generally there had some ups and downs, but there were overall a negative relationship. And as you got further along the trend, that negative relationship grew stronger. The problem here is that in traditional settings, these may be different teams, different individuals responsible for the different data assets. They may or may not be talking to each other. And often it is long after the time frame has ended, long after the damage has been done, that anyone realizes the widening gap and potential impact on the business. What we're really talking about here is embedding automated analytics to prevent this from happening. We're talking about building hot alert trigger systems that are in place based on the type of time series regressions and analytic patterns of detection to pull this together and automate when a hot alert is occurring. It shouldn't be need to rely on hand anymore. It can't rely on people talking to each other with the best of intention. This is a way for us to leverage technology, to leverage business intelligence, to make the work we do more actionable, and to bring it closer to decisions instead of waiting for someone to talk to each other. Now how that plays out will be, of course, quite different. There's going to be settings where it's still only surveys only, relatively simple as in the bottom of the chart. There'll be settings where we go all the way up to comprehensive, connected, predictive, and dynamic sets of relationships across survey and non-survey data streams. We don't see a one-size-fits-all world in this world of connected data intelligence, but we do see a framework of increasing analytic sophistication an increasing scope depending on the need. So let's look at an example, a very specific example of what this might be. This is the vision in action. This is for a situation in which we ask consumer perceptions directly against customer receipts. So in this case, we're not looking at aggregate data. We're looking where everything has been matched by design for sales and perceptions to be in the same research system. Once we do this, the potential insights are simple and powerful. In this particular example, we saw immediately that if you were going to test what is the likelihood of a consumer to return to the store on the next trip, if he or she spent more time waiting in line to check out, that was a bad thing. It grew dissatisfaction. It grew the likelihood down that they would return. But because we had this all tied together, we did a lot of modeling, a lot of exploration, and we could see quite clearly what we call a friendliness effect. And in fact, if those consumers that were waiting in line had what they perceived to be a friendly cashier, they often were a little more forgiving, and that could overcome the negative experience of waiting in line, as long as they thought it sort of made sense, maybe time of season, or whatever it may be. But it's this kind of deeper story and the managerial implications that come from it that we see as part of brand guidance in action. In this case, it was a simple surveying off the receipt. So we're granular, we're single sourced as opposed to aggregate, and we have surveys and behavioral insights together, and we can uncover new insights. Here we go. Once we do that, we start to immediately go to that point 3 I mentioned earlier about leveraging granularity for deeper insights. And more times, while we strive for a design like you just saw, where we have everything single sourced, you ask a respondent that you already know their behaviors for, we have to spend more time stitching data together to map consumer journeys. The stitching earlier was all in aggregate. It was all estimated relationships across different data assets over time. But more and more, we're looking to stitch at a granular level, potentially at a consumer level, to really reap the benefits of connected data intelligence. In some examples, we have things like loyalty card data on shopping decisions, set-top box on TV viewing, metered panels perhaps on online and mobile behaviors for searching and browsing. It could be up to that many, or if not more, passively observed and digitally measured assets in the mix. In those cases, we try to look for opportunities to survey so that we can at least have some of the data that not only has behaviors but also attitudes in the same file, because we're going to need that information to help connect the dots. Now, as I said, this is all pushing towards single source, pushing towards single source to get to an insight we don't otherwise have. So if we design intelligently, if we think both analytical design and research design, and we start to ask questions in our surveys that we can use to form hooks and represent assets that are common across data sets. So we know it's not perfect, but if we ask questions about TV consumption, and we're asking them on our digital panelists, we can then start to use that information along with the set-top box data to start to impute missing data. And without getting into all the various fusion techniques and look-alike modeling, ultimately we start to stitch data together so that we have an estimated data set at a rather granular level that gives us a sense of what respondent level cross-screen behavior could or could not look like. So instead of just working in the aggregate and always trying to estimate across different data sets, we're pushing and pushing to work in the disaggregate and estimate missing observations for individuals for whom we have some great information but incomplete information. Ultimately, if we're successful, we're able to map the consumer journey. And that success is just as 100% reliant on the strength of the hooks, the strength of the analytics doing the fusion, and the assets that are feeding in. But once built, we really get to see some amazing things. We get to see media consumption, in this example output, throughout the day for an individual segment across multiple different platforms. It's not just what does this look like over here on TV? What does it look like over there on digital? What does it look like? What does it look? It starts to paint a clearer picture across platforms. And we get a sense of what the consumer journey may look like. Let's look at this stylized example for a moment. This again is based on a fused data set. But what we start to see are the network of relationships we talked about before. In this case, we've got in-store purchase being impacted largely from TV advertising and online shopping. We've got online purchase being directly influenced by online shopping and indirectly through TV. So we get a sense of the direct and indirect effects just like we would in our estimated aggregate level relationships. We have much more confidence and much more granularity that we can go deep on and explore why, because we're at the consumer level. And again, another example in this case where we found purchase led to social, as well as advertising exposure led to social. So social was elastic to the messaging. Social was elastic to prior consumption, all of which then tied into perceptions of the brand. And the key here is, again, connecting the dots across the ecosystem, better answering business questions, but doing it at a level of disaggregation so that we can really slice and dice the data. Okay, that was a lot. But let me at least give you a couple summary thoughts before we close out. First, connected data intelligence in action. We've seen a lot of different results here in a short amount of time. You've seen connected data intelligence in terms of aggregate level, starting to be generalized insights. Underlying search levels that reflect changes in interest and salience of the brand over time. Social that's reflective of digital word of mouth and strongly influenced by events. And both measures that are highly elastic to media investment and creative quality. Those are sort of global initial learnings. But as we start making deeper dives and we analyze particular content from social commentary for a given brand in a given moment in time in a given market, and we start to estimate that impact across a network of marketing relationships, we always see those networks exist, but how they actually play out and the particular contributions vary quite a bit. And when we move down to consumer level insights, we can even go deeper as we start to show. But we start to really rely on new techniques, analytic techniques that allow us to stitch data together to get back to that ultimate form of data curation. But here, it all comes down to having the right hooks. If we don't have the right hooks, we know we won't be successful. And last but not least, let's get back to what I said earlier about what we need to do differently. We talked about mining existing data assets to uncover hidden insights. That can mean many things. But one of the ways we are starting is leveraging our digital behavioral assets that exist en masse over time through a specific analytic platform to inform brand planning. We then want to take those assets and connect the dots, connect those assets into our ecosystem. We know these things do not exist in a vacuum. And marketing, of course, does not exist in a vacuum. So we can't analyze social, search, or other digital assets in a vacuum. We always have to connect the dots back to our other research assets, whether they be survey-based or behavioral-based. And this notion of granularity. For us, we want to push for micro-level insights and build from there whenever possible. But we also want to leverage the best possible macro-level data and have that inform moving forward even when consumer level does not exist. Those are our three big recommendations, and as you probably see, you couldn't really deliver any of them without embedding analytics in category and brand and communications expertise into a system via automation. Viewing it by hand won't work. We have to have that embedded to maximize impact. That's it. So, any questions?
Thank you so much. That was absolutely fascinating. Thank you. This is very eye-opening, and we've been getting a lot of questions in.
Good.
I want to encourage people to keep sending them in, but let me just reach across here. And the one that just came in from Nick, I don't know who Nick is. Do you think a good place to start for a brand is to start trying to connect a survey source to a big data source And how can you find the best one? Would this be by connecting a why survey to a buy big data? To buy big data.
That's an interesting question. Yes, the starting point is a super important question. And there's not one answer to that. I would always start back with, well, what's the question you want to answer first? What's the marketing question we want to answer before I gave the research advice on where to start? But I would, as a general rule, if the opportunity exists to tie a behavioral asset to a survey asset at a respondent or consumer level, that is a great place to start, because then you're not in, then you've got the confidence of asking and observing the same individual as opposed to having to estimate the relationships across. Now, is that always possible? No. Can that always be done over time? No. There's all sorts of different dimensions to it. But that's where more and more of our engagements start from. We always start, like we said, from, well, what is the question? Not let's start with big data or small data or whatever. But after we know the question, as a general rule, if you have the ability to connect at a disaggregate level, that's probably a better first opportunity.
Great. Okay, thanks. Here's another one. How would you recommend gathering survey data to match social and search? And related, what are some of the techniques that you've used to connect different data sources?
Excellent question. Hold on. I'm writing down. Okay.
Okay, wait. Should I do it slowly?
No,
How would
fine.
you recommend gathering survey data to match social and search? Let's start with that.
Yes. So just to sort of put some bounds on that question, since it's so big, the survey data we tend to work with is largely about brand communications, brand performance. So let's just put that as a bucket for survey data. When we start, the first thing in terms of connecting the dots, the most important thing, and let's just talk social for a moment, is understanding how you're cleaning the social data. We have seen examples, and this has been, new learning for me over the last few years as we've all moved into this place, with brands that had a few million, just use that number, tweets on a given year, and it turns out that that few million is actually 1 million after you clean out all the junk. And then after you clean out all the junk, what we have found is the best way to connect the dots is to have whatever you're doing, whether it's machine learning or some other way of aggregating the data. There's lots of different ways to do it. We have found that what we already know about brand success through offline measurement, through neuroscience techniques, through other things, if we bring those learnings into the cleaning process, we get a more robust back-end story of brand from social. If we don't bring those learnings in, then we are at a riskier position because there are ways of aggregating the data that make lots of sense, but for the purpose of understanding brands, we find much cleaner stories when we bring in our offline learnings into our online cleaning. Then once we've got that, the analytic techniques, it's really what you're comfortable with. Most of what we're talking about with social is at an aggregate level. So either we're doing some form of nested regressions where they talk to each other, or some form of Bayesian networks that allow us to look at multiple assets together. Either way, the key, the statistics, there's different time series properties of one and the other, good or bad, but the key is the upfront cleaning, because that's what really ties back to garbage in, garbage out.
Okay. I guess one comment was this seems appropriate and easy conceptually, but perhaps difficult in practice. So I think many people are wrestling with this.
And that would be an honest assessment. You would get no disagreement from me or anyone else that was being honest with you.
I guess that's why we're all talking about these things, because it is hard. Another question, could you elaborate on your example of having the right hooks? You emphasized asking the right questions. Maybe you could provide some examples.
Yeah, of course. For the data stitching piece, okay, that piece is where we're not necessarily running aggregate level estimation, but we're now trying to get granular. And then the hooks start with, well, how granular can you get? How granular can you read out set-top box data for TV? Can you get it for a consumer? Probably not. You're maybe at 30 consumers or 50 consumers or 100 consumers. Maybe you're at a segment or a zip code or something. So first you got to think about even the data itself and what kind of aggregation and disaggregation you're going to be working with. So the survey may be for the person. You may have a panel where you can actually watch a person or a household, but maybe another piece is at another level of aggregation. That then drives the hooks. So using the TV example, perhaps, you're probably going to need to ask some questions about TV consumption, which we know is not the greatest thing to do in the world necessarily to measure consumption, but we were doing that for the purpose of getting a reliable data set, and a best as accurate as we can data set for that person that we're going to use the set-top box data to connect back to. So we have the survey-based question on the same phenomena as the media consumption question. We just have the survey data for the individual. We have the set-top box maybe for a similar demographic, region, segment, whatever it may be. And then we need those two things, and then we will use those two sources to talk to each other. But what that will actually be will always come back to, it may be the same survey media question, but how that will work will come back to, okay, well, what level of disaggregation can you get the behavioral data at? And that's what kind of drives the quality of the data stitching.
Okay, great.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it did. I mean, I hope that the person who asked the question agrees, but it made sense to me. Another question. I'm sorry if I'm getting an echo here. What can brands do to ensure that they are set up to collect and connect various data sources, both organizationally and strategically? You can see there are a lot of organizational issues around here, around what you're discussing.
Such a great question. And probably, in your picking up the organizational piece, the irony of this all is I bet there's a lot of folks on this phone like myself that have spent years working on analytics and research on how to connect the dots. But we all know the biggest hindrances tend to be the organizational structure and the fact that people don't always talk to each other. Such a great question, and there's probably a million organizational consultants that would be chomping at the bit to answer it. What I've found works best is when you can get senior level buy-in on a question, a business question, whatever it may be, that requires connected data to answer that question. And you know you'll be in a suboptimal place without it. So giving you an example, the one we would tend to work with the most would be something like, what new brand positioning should we consider that would maximize growth over time? What kinds of opportunities for messaging have we not played up enough? Where can we find new communication territories? Now, someone might hear that and think, run a survey, that maybe, or something like that. But what we've been playing up and sharing across organizations is to really answer that question, you bring in survey data, you bring in shared data in media and marketing mix factors in social, and start to test out these networks. And because we've started with executive buy-in from day one on the benefits of doing so, we have found those projects to be much more successful. When the project starts with, hey, wouldn't connected data be great? Let's test some new things to connect data. They generally don't go anywhere or nowhere important, right, from a business perspective. They stay in research. But if it starts with the business question and you get senior buy-in early on how connected data will get you further, then you're going to go somewhere.
Okay, great. Yeah, good senior level buy-in is always so important. Okay, I think we have time for two more questions, so I'm going to just do this as quickly as possible. Do you find that particular channels, search, for example, search or social, connect more easily to traditional survey-based questions such as awareness, perception, et cetera?
Good question. It varies all over the place. I would say it's something that we now have a point of view on, but it's an ongoing and developing point of view. As you could probably see in some of the examples, search is more predictable, and search you can find more consistent patterns in the search data. I used that one example of search to awareness, and we used a couple of examples of search to sales. Those relationships are generally easier to find and more consistent than social. because I think it's the nature of what search, you're giving an interest, an indication of what you're looking for, etc. Social is much trickier. Socials, you really need to get into that qualitative nature of it. It kind of goes all over the place. You see, it can be different things, and like you saw in that one example, sometimes it skews towards the creative, sometimes it skews towards the brand, sometimes it skews towards something else. So I find social to be harder to generalize from, but that doesn't mean it's less important. It means you have to analyze the setting for the individual brand. Search does show, we find, easier to generalize patterns.
Okay, well that actually leads beautifully into the last question. Our brand teams have resisted investing in search, and your presentation would suggest that it's foundational to brand salience. What case study or external argument might help to persuade a change of opinion?
Good question. Well, besides, download the deck. No, I'm kidding. No, what I would actually say is we could share examples, but even better than, when we all know this, better than examples would be to run this type of analysis against your own search and brand data and see what that relationship looks like. We did that years ago in the financial services category. We just started this, maybe 6 years ago. And we found one of the first times that it looked like nothing was aligning. But when you did this kind of modeling work and pulled out the short-term influences on search, all the search data in terms of a long-term trend and our equity data were very parallel. And no one was looking at it because they were looking at search in total and kind of scratching their heads against the wall. So besides sharing cases, I think it's really there also about the approach and making sure you control for the short term and long term and run it against your own data or your own situation to see how strong the relationship is.
Okay, that's great. I'm afraid we've run out of time, but it was a fabulous presentation, many excellent questions. If Bill didn't get to your questions, or if there are additional things that you would like to discuss with him, we invite you to reach out to him at his email address, which is on the slide that is now up on your screen. Thank you so much, Bill. That was really wonderful. Our next webinar will be held on December 3rd with Dilip Soman of the University of Toronto, and we look forward to not seeing but connecting with many of you then. I also just wanted to put in a quick plug for a conference that MSI will be sponsoring on February 24th and 25th on data disruption and the transforming media landscape. That will be held at the NYU Stern School, which is Bill's alma mater, and we will be sending out more information on that. But if you're interested, please go to the MSI website, and there will soon be an agenda posted. So once again, many thanks. Thanks to you all for being here, and we look forward to the next time.